vitriol in the building. But, over time, these things tend to peter out a little bit. I was covering the Leafs daily when Tavares went back to what at the time was Nassau Coliseum for the first time after signing in Toronto. And you remember people throwing snakes and freaking out in the parking lot. I mean, over the years, he still gets booed there, but it's not quite as passionate. And there's probably a day where, in retirement, John Tavares will, be able to do something with the Islanders organization. I think over time, the same thing will happen here for Marner with the Leafs because, whatever you think of the ending, he obviously delivered a lot of memorable moments or times, was part of a very hopeful period for the Leafs. I know, people will also remember the playoff disappointments with this team, and Mitch was, part of those. But, a lot of good things happened here to vault them to fifth in the organization's points list before leaving at age 28.
So the tampering stuff with Vegas, where does this go from here?
I don't know. I think that it will probably subside too, but I can't say that definitively at this point. I guess we'll just have to see when the dust settles. I mean, this was always a unique case. I mean, the Leafs and Golden Knights had talked trade on Marner more than once. They talked about it at the trade deadline as, a potential three-way trade with Carolina that never came to pass. But obviously during the process of those conversations, it was known that Vegas wanted Mitch, that the Leafs would consider the trade, and that Mitch Marner would want to go to Vegas if it could ever happen. And so, it's not as night and day or clear to say, that something, as serious as tampering necessarily happened. I mean, when everybody at the table at least knew that all the things I just listed were true. As I said, I don't have all the information, and I'm not sure where we'll go from here. But the fact that it ends relatively amicably with, getting the team to sign him to that 8-year deal, getting some kind of package back here, which we'll soon find out what the details of that are. All those things I do think suggest to me that there might be some feelings and emotions that involved for everyone here that I don't know that it's going to rise to the level of anything else coming of those allegations.
So we're chatting with Chris Johnston. It just broke that Mitch Marner has completed a sign and trade with the Leafs in Vegas. 8 years, $12 million per. He's going from Toronto to Vegas. We don't know what's coming back. There are indications coming in now that it sounds like Marchand and Florida are going to figure this out, CJ. So if that happens, let's presume that happens. Brad Marchand returns. Sam Bennett returned. Aaron Ekblad returned to Florida. If you're Brad Treliving, what do you do now? Like, what is possible for him to do with what's
plan C?
Yeah, what is the next plan? Because, 6 months ago they probably wanted to keep Mitch Marner. 6 minutes ago they were hoping to get Brad Marchand. What does he do now to complete his DNA change?
Well, we'll have to see. Is it on the free agent market or the trade market? Because, free agency, we are still going to have a show tomorrow. There will be free agency, but we're missing a headliner, right? I would say probably the next best option in free agency might be someone like Nikolai Ehlers, very different type of player than Brad Marchand, but, a proven top six winger, that has been in the league a long time, and I do think holds some appeal for Toronto. But, the problem, of course, is that he holds appeal for other people, too. And, he's going to have options. And so I certainly don't have enough to say whether, what percentage chance the Leafs would have at him. But I would think that he'll at least be someone they're making a call to once, he officially hits the market. And beyond that, I do know the Leafs front office has been gearing up for what could be a long summer, that there might be, take some time for them to get the roster to a level, where they're comfortable with it. I know they're very excited about Matias Maselli, who they traded for today. Not obviously a huge name necessarily at this point, but he did have a pretty big season a couple years ago, and he's still young in his career and has, the ability, I think, to be a top six winger for this team. And so, the truth is it might take some time. I don't know that we're going to get the answer tomorrow. But, the Leafs have got a fair bit of business done here in recent days, and they are still armed with cap space to improve their team, even with Brad Marchand not available for them to bid on, and obviously with Marner, leaving town.
That's where I was going to go, Chris, is does that more think that they would sit on this cap space and start to take a look at the trade market and maybe even into the season where you've got some teams that they might covet a player or two, but maybe that team is not ready to move away from that player until, we'll call it U.S. Thanksgiving type of thing, where, I think there's teams that think that they're in it right now, but they'll change their mind probably 20 games into the season.
No, they know they're not in it, Jamie. They just want to wait until U.S. Thanksgiving so they prove to their owner that they just had to look at it.
It's fair enough, but I guess that my point is, do you feel like Tree has the flexibility to wait to go into the season to maybe find that right player, that right fit for his organization?
For sure he does. I mean, it really comes down to that. Obviously, they have to be good enough to get to the playoffs. Yep. And I think knowing what we know of the roster, it's not a crazy thought to think that they will be. And they might not even know who the player is yet. I mean, that's the reality. They don't necessarily have to have the exact answer to this question. I realize it's not comfortable, and it's probably a hard thing to message publicly to a fan base because you're losing, an absolute bona fide all-star, superstar player in Mitch Marner, and you don't necessarily have the shiny toy to unveil and say, here's his replacement. But, we're moving into a different era, I think, in the NHL. I mean, it's been a pretty crazy few days. I mean, I feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose here. Mm-hmm. And, we have the cap going up, and I just think there's going to be more player movement than we've had in some of the recent past. And I do believe it's going to continue. I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow. Obviously, tomorrow is really a day dedicated to signings. But, you get on the other side of the July 4th weekend, the U.S. teams are going to be looking for other ways to fill their needs. And I do think there's a possibility Toronto's among them and more shakes out. So, I do think that the Leafs, one of the benefits of having a GM like Brad Treliving, he's a very experienced guy, pretty calm, at the controls, and he's not going to force anything or make a bad decision just because of the emotion and everything swirling around right now. I think that he'll be patient, and, the Leafs have seldom had cap space, as we all know, for a long, long time. They might actually be armed with cap space, which can give them the chance to do some things that maybe they couldn't consider in the past.
Yeah. Now, with trades means assets have to go, which is what can complicate things to an extent because, to my knowledge, they've got Easton Cow, and then there's a big gap in terms of high-end prospects. They don't have first-round picks for the next 2 years. That's where it gets complicated for me, trying to project where the Leafs are going to go because the Florida guys, if they keep Bennett, they've kept Ekblad. Ekblad felt like it was 4 weeks ago. It was 40 minutes ago he re-signed in Florida. Yeah. And it sounds like Marchand is real close to a long-term deal in Florida as well. So if they keep the three of them, and, again, Marner's gone, they picked up Michelli today from Utah. You don't have to do everything tomorrow. We know that. But if it's Marner out, Michelli in, and there's not a ton of other big needle movers available via free